Welcome back to the podcast. It has been a while since I've wanted to sit down to record this episode. I am very pleased to be doing so now. I'm very pleased to be getting some wisdom through this technological ether into your life, into your brain, into your ears. And not wisdom that necessarily comes from me, but rather wisdom that I am passing on. And it's wisdom that has to do with happiness. I've wanted to talk about happiness for a very long time as a subject for the podcast, because happiness is a real, it's a touchy subject in the world, especially right now. When many people are asked what they want out of life, they'll say that they want to be happy. And to me, happiness isn't necessarily a goal, it's a byproduct. It's a byproduct of living in truth and making decisions for me that are right for me, and sort of carving my own path forward and not necessarily following down a road that someone else has carved for me. And I've been thinking about this a lot, but in my life and in my career, I haven't really had very many mentors. I haven't had many people who have taught me, unless, of course, I signed up for a specific training, in which case, obviously, people taught me. But I can count on one hand, with fewer than 5 fingers, the number of people who have actually, held my hand as I learned, taught me in a non-selfish kind of way, or in a way where they weren't really gaining anything other than the transmission of information and wisdom. I consider myself to be very self-taught. I've never really vibed with traditional modes of education, so whatever subjects I wanted to learn, I taught myself. And whatever technologies I wanted to use, I taught myself. And it's all just, for me, it's a process of identifying what I want to get done and then doing it and feeling my way through it, but ultimately getting it done. And obviously there are things that I learn on the way that if I knew at the beginning of these journeys, I would have probably applied, but nonetheless, the wisdom is hard earned. And for me, living my life like this brings me happiness. Happiness, I think when people say that they want happiness, I think ultimately they also realize that it's not the goal, it's the byproduct. I think what they're saying is they want to be able to make decisions in their own lives that result in them feeling happy. Possibly because they've taken decisions in their lives that did not, I guess, result in happiness, but maybe resulted in something else, in dissatisfaction or frustration. And I understand that many people are going through life having followed the commonly accepted avenues of behavior and decorum, thinking that if these are the commonly accepted avenues, then that must mean that we will find what we're hoping to find from these avenues. And a lot of people are disappointed. A lot of people get disappointed by the experience of life. They come to the conclusion that what they hoped they were going to get by doing what everybody else seems to be doing, they haven't gotten. And all of a sudden, they find themselves on the hero's journey, for lack of a better term. Some of them following a new spiritual path, others blindly, I shouldn't say blindly, that's somewhat of a negative connotation, but nonetheless thinking that if they continue to seek what they're looking for from external sources, that they will find the happiness and the contentment that they're looking for. And ultimately, what I have learned, and what I learned very early on in life, is that if you expect life to present you with what you need to be happy, you're basically playing a losing game. That it's not up to external factors to provide these things to us. It's up to us. It's up to us to make the decisions that we need to make so that ultimately we find what we're looking for, and what we are finding for, or what we are looking for rather, it has to do with the day-to-day. It has to do with the seemingly mundane. It has to do with how we choose to live this existence. How much of the game do we choose to play or not? And ultimately, for me, it's very much about doing it on my terms. I watched this great documentary on YouTube a few weeks ago. I think it was called The Yogis of Tibet. It was fantastic. I highly, highly recommend it. And in the documentary, there were Tibetan monks who were telling us that, in life, we all have a single goal, and that goal is to be happy. And that really landed with me. It resonated with me because ultimately what they're saying is do what you need to do to be happy. Whether that is a decision that you make that maybe you wouldn't have made because it's not the decision that everybody else is making, or whether it's a light switch in your mind where you just decide, okay, you know what, like fuck it, I'm not going to pay attention to all of this stuff that is dragging me down. It'll be there when I want to come back to it. But right now in this moment, I'm choosing to focus on the stuff that uplifts me, the stuff that feeds me, nourishes me, makes me feel better. Whether that's how you find happiness, these monks were saying this is what the goal of life is. And if you consider that right now where we are in history is very much not about that, at least not in the first degree. It's very much about threat, and it's very much about division, and it's very much about fear. Then we can only, if we look at this moment in history through a spiritual lens, we can only deduce that maybe this is the greatest spiritual lesson that we have all ever been presented with at the same time. And I mean all of us together being presented with the same spiritual lesson at the same time. And that lesson is be happy. Find your happy now. Because if you're still looking for it to come from external sources, guess what? There doesn't seem like there is any good news out there right now. And I believe that that's on purpose. I believe that everything is unfolding the way it should. And I believe that we're meant to really learn, and not just like learn in okay, I get it. Learn in okay, now I'm going to behave differently. I'm going to live my life differently. I'm going to act differently. Because if we truly want happiness, then it requires us to do something about it. Whether, again, that's just a thought away, or whether we make changes in our lives and how we live. The only way to be happy, I think, is to believe in your mind that it can be happy, that the mind can be happiness, that happiness and the thoughts and the conditions that instigate happiness are always present all the time. They're just a thought away. Again, we tend to get drawn into the negative and into the stuff that we don't have and into the things that are not going well or the way we want them to go. And we spend so much cognitive time and so much emotional time and so much energetic time in those thoughts, when the stuff that is happy related or like happy adjacent, it's a thought away there. And they all coexist with all of the other stuff. I think it's very important to notice. I think when we lose sight of this, we then turn to the material things that we think are going to bring us happiness, because that's what our culture has encouraged us to believe, that these things will bring us happiness. Get the education, get the job, get the material stuff, get the apartment or the house, get the dog, get the car, get whatever, the watch, whatever, get the phone, all of these things that we've been told contribute to status. And that people place their value on. You know what? When the phone breaks down, when you lose the house, when all of a sudden the economy comes down to a grinding halt and there's no money coming in and all of this shit starts to disappear, then who are you? Then who are we? At that point, where does the value come from? Because if we have placed our own personal value on the things that we have when we don't have those things, what the hell is left? So years ago, when Google Plus existed, which for those of you who don't know what it was a social network, a social media network. When Google Plus existed, I had put probably a photo with both of my books, but specifically the first book, The Examined Life. People who bought it took photos of the book all over the world. And if you want to check it out, go on to, I suppose, Instagram and just look up the hashtag The Examined Life book. And you'll see tons and tons and tons of photos of the book, different hands, different people, different countries, different beaches. Amazing. It was amazing. And it wasn't something that I initiated. It just sort of took on a life of its own. But years ago, I was posting, it was either a photo of a book or a photo of a quote from the book, just as sort of like a PR thing, right? And it was something about happiness. It was a comment about happiness. Something related to the fact that happiness, is the goal. Ultimately. And somebody wrote to me, somebody left a comment basically admonishing me for saying something like happiness should be a goal, because this person said, I'm a psychologist, and we learn in psychology that happiness is a temporary state. It is a transient state, and it's not something that can be attained on a permanent level. And to tell people that they need to be seeking happiness is irresponsible, and how dare you. And listen, I mean, what you all need to know about my social media networks, my social media channels, is that I curate that shit. So if you leave stupid fucking comments on my stuff, I will delete that shit and pretend it never happened, because I can. And also because I'm not interested in getting involved in a debate. I understand what she was saying, but the fact of the matter is, seen through a spiritual lens, I wasn't coming from a psychological place. I was speaking through a Hindu spiritual yogic lens. And through that lens, yes, it is about happiness. And obviously, it's not about finding this permanent happy state, not in a way that is accessible to, common people, us living this, this moment in time. But ultimately, if I can say to people, you should try to be happy a little bit more. And okay, wait, let me retract that. Not you should try to be happy. You should make decisions that bring you happiness more on the regular. If I can get that across, then I am doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So obviously, I deleted that comment. I ignored the woman because I could. But I've never forgotten it, because I really do believe that it is about happy. It's about being able to look back on our lives at the end of our lives, if we're blessed with that opportunity, to say, you know what, I led a happy life. And as I've said, I think in previous podcast episodes, being happy is a choice. It is a choice. And you may believe that that's not true. You may believe that, no, happiness comes from the shit that I get and the circumstances around me. Okay, well, again, if that's the game that you want to play, good luck with that. Because if you buy into things bringing you happiness, then you're also going to buy into things bringing you unhappiness and misery and suffering. And then you are its bitch. That means you're getting knocked around. That means that you are happy when external factors dictate that you should be so. And it means that you're going to be suffering when external factors dictate that it should be so. And personally, I'm not playing that game. I want to have as much influence in my experience of life and my experience and my relationship to happiness as possible. And for me, that's very much about deleting the comments. It's about weeding out the people who I believe, for whatever reason, just aren't my people. And more importantly, gravitating towards the ones who I believe are my people, and making sure that I am respecting our relationships and fostering those relationships. It's about making decisions in my life that may be unpopular with other people, but that I want to make, because if I don't make them, I will feel like I let myself down. It's about all of that stuff. So I want to talk now to you about happiness, because I want to challenge you to look at your relationship to happiness and ask you how you have been finding it. How have you been in relationship with happiness? And when it doesn't present itself, what is life like then for you? I'm very curious, because listen, before I was doing any of this work, happiness to me was, it wasn't an option. It wasn't an option because I didn't feel like I could just be me in the world. And so regardless of what I bought and regardless of the shit that I had, I wasn't happy. I just wasn't happy because I couldn't be me. Or at least I didn't think I could be me. And then when I went to the opposite end of the spectrum and said, you know what, fuck it, I'm doing things on my terms, all of a sudden I found that happiness. I found that satisfaction, that contentment. And that to me was my higher learning. And to me, that was one of the most important lessons I could ever have learned. So, for starters, I want you to reach out and let me know what your experience with happiness is. If you have been let down by life, if you have learned in your own way that happiness isn't something that comes from the next thing you could buy, the next drug you could take, the next drink you could have, the next person you could sleep with, the next whatever, but rather something that comes from within you when you decide to change your mindset or your perspective. I want to know. I'm really curious, because I know that we are all living the same existence. We're just not talking about a lot of the stuff that we should be talking about, which is why I do this podcast, and it's why I write and teach and do all the other stuff, because I believe that my story is your story. And the book that I'm writing right now, called Storyteller, is titled Storyteller and includes stories from my life so that perhaps they could reflect back to the reader's own stories and existence, and somehow validate it in a way that maybe the reader didn't think it deserved, When we sort of fall back to Hinduism and we sort of look for any references to happiness, there is a really, really important reference to happiness that comes from the Ashtavakra Gita. Now, the Ashtavakra Gita is a lesser-known Hindu scripture. Ashtavakra is, well, in Hindu mythology, is a boy who was born to a father who cursed his son when his son was in utero. And so what this means is, listen, I don't know if I've told this story, if I've recounted this myth in a podcast before. I'm just going to do it here. And if I'm repeating myself, bear with me, fast forward, do whatever you want. There was this man who was very educated, and he would recite the Vedas, which are the oldest scriptures in Hinduism. And occasionally he would mispronounce some of the words, some of the phrases, some of the verses. Anyway, this man's wife was pregnant, and their unborn child, hearing his father mispronounce the Vedas, would correct his father. And the father was so proud, couldn't believe that his unborn son was correcting him. Every time it happened, he would curse the child. Long story short, when the child was born with 8 deformities. I don't remember if I just said 9 or 8, but nonetheless, it happened 8 times where the son corrected the father. The father cursed the son 8 times. The son was born with 8 physical deformities and ended up walking on his hands, with his legs out to the side. And if you know Ashtavakrasana as a yoga posture, that's the pose where it's like the arm balance with the legs out to the side. The head is like a few inches above the ground. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just go on to anybody who you know who's very into yoga and the physical postures, go through their photos. They'll probably have a photo on social media where they're in that photo, because if you can get into the pose and you're like, just take the photo, make that your profile photo, and everybody thinks you're the shit. But anyway, but I digress. Anyway, this kid is born, he grows up, and at a certain point he decides that he wants to be in the presence of educated men, learned men. And so he decides that he's going to go to the king's court, King Janaka. He decides that he's going to go to the king's court, and he's going to be in the presence of scholarly men and maybe gain some insight and some wisdom. And so he walks there for days and days and days and days. He walks on his hands to get to the king's court. And he finally gets to the king's court, and in he walks. And the king is there with all of the king's, entourage. And they see this boy walking in on his hands, who is, for all intents and purposes, physically disabled. And they start laughing at him. And Ashtavakra starts to cry. His crying, though, sounds like laughter. And the king comes up to him and says, "Why are you laughing? Don't you get it? We think that you're an anomaly. Why would you start laughing if we are laughing at you? We're not laughing with you, we're laughing at you." And Ashtavakra says to him, "I think that you are mistaken. I'm not laughing, I'm crying, because I really busted my ass to get here thinking I was going to be in the presence of greater people. To be educated, to be inspired, to be uplifted. And instead I find myself surrounded by you idiots who are taking my appearance to be who I am, and right there showing me that I wasted my time getting here." In that moment, Janaka fell to his knees, and he bowed to Ashtavakra, and he said to Ashtavakra, "You know what? You teach me. You are my teacher. I see the error of my ways. Teach me." And the conversation between Ashtavakra and the king is the Hindu scripture referred to as the Ashtavakra Gita. The word Gita in Hinduism or in Sanskrit, whatever, means song. And so this is the song of Ashtavakra. And I want to read you the beginning of the Ashtavakra Gita. This is something you can find on, if you just Google Ashtavakra Gita, there are free ebooks, free PDFs that you can download if you wanted to follow along or if you wanted to just download it and have it as a reference. But I'm going to read a bit to you. Janaka said, Master, how is knowledge to be achieved, detachment acquired, liberation attained? Ashtavakra said, to be free, shun the experiences of the senses, like poison. Turn your attention to forgiveness, sincerity, kindness, simplicity, truth. You are not earth, water, fire, or air, nor are you empty space. Liberation is to know yourself as awareness alone, the witness of these. Abide in awareness, with no illusion of person. You will be instantly free and at peace. You have no caste or duties. You are invisible, unattached, formless. You are the witness of all things. Be happy. Right and wrong, pleasure and pain, exist in mind only. They are not your concern. You neither do nor enjoy. You are free. You are the solitary witness of all that is, forever free. Your only bondage is not seeing this. The thought, I am the doer, is the bite of a poisonous snake. To know, I do nothing, is the wisdom of faith. Be happy. A single understanding, I am the one awareness, consumes all suffering in the fire of an instant. Be happy. You are unbounded awareness, bliss, supreme bliss, in which the universe appears like the mirage of a snake in a rope. Be happy. It is true what they say, you are what you think. If you think you are bound, you are bound. If you think you are free, you are free. You are the self, the solitary witness. You are perfect, all-pervading, one. You are free, desireless, forever still. The universe is but a seeming in you. Meditate on this. I am awareness alone, unity itself. Give up the idea that you are separate, a person, that there is within and without. You have long been bound thinking, I am a person. Let the knowledge, I am awareness alone, be the sword that frees you. So I wanted to just read that excerpt of the Ashtavakra Gita to you, because if you were paying attention, if you caught on in a few of those verses, basically this boy is saying to this king, you want to be unattached? You want to live a life of, for lack of a better term, happiness? Be happy. Just be happy. Let go of the idea that you are the person, that you are your dramas, that you are your money, that you are your successes. Let go of all of those concepts that we have been so encouraged to believe are real and true, and understand that you are an energy that is at the heart of every other thing in the world, and that energy is not affected by how much money you have. It doesn't care. It's not affected by fear. It doesn't get afraid. I've spoken about this in much older episodes of the podcast, but ultimately the concept, the understanding in Hinduism that there is one source energy that animates all things, including us. If we understand ourselves to be that energy, all of a sudden there is an unattachment from all the things that typically keep us in suffering, and that's where we find peace. That's where we find contentment. That is where we find happy. So, I want you to give all of this a think. And I really do want you to reach out rather to me and let me know what your experience with happiness has been. If you were, for lack of a better term, worshiping false idols, thinking that that was going to bring you happiness and it didn't, or if it did, I want to know. I want to know what your journey has been, what your relationship with happiness has been. Because the more I hear from you all, first of all, the more I know that you're listening, number one. Number two, the more I appreciate the give and take. And the more I know, the more I am reminded that the journey is a common journey. It's not just an individual thing. We are all living the exact same experience. So, with all of that said, give this all a good think. Let me know what you think. I hope these words have resonated with you. I hope they've landed in a really helpful kind of way. And I'll see you later. This has been the Examine Life with Bram Levinson.